I love to look at the etymology of a word. And so distraction comes from a Latin root word, distrahere, which means to be drawn in different directions.
My experience with distractions has shifted over the years. I think I've learned to stop seeing them as interruptions and start to see them as signals as a leader.
Hi, and welcome to the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting. This season, we're welcoming fellow coaches back to the show to explore how people can move beyond naming and claiming their talents and start to aim their talents. We're calling this season Strengths Applied.
And our topic today is managing distractions for productivity. You might already recognize some of our guests today. So we are back with Bill Beachy. We've invited him back to share with us. He is the founder of the Beachy Group. His Clifton Strengths Top 5 are strategic, ideation, activator, maximizer, and futuristic. Welcome back, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. Good to see you guys again.
Nice to see you as well, Bill. And our other guest today is Ron Cheshire, and he's an executive coach for teams and leaders. Does primarily a lot of his work through the co-leadership group. He's out of just north of me in Montreal. His top 5 are individualization, strategic, analytical, futuristic, and discipline. And he has a common phrase that those are his top 5. But he's always focusing on his best 5, depending upon the situation he's in. I love that. I'm sure he's going to be bringing all 5 or 10 of his themes as we have our conversation today. Jen, I want to ask you to start us off. Why are we talking about managing distractions for productivity for today? And why are we having these two wonderful gentlemen join us again?
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome back, Ron. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
On the heels of our last episode, Chad, on remote and hybrid work, I think this is a great place to have a talk about managing distractions. So because we talked about all of those different work styles and places where we can work, between the two of them, both can have distractions. So what I'm hoping our listeners will take away from today is the importance of understanding how you work best, how to advocate for your needs so you can be the most productive. And I know with our great guests on today, we're going to get some excellent examples about using our talents to help manage those distractions and increase our productivity. Yeah. Do you have some stats for us today?
Yeah. So I know we're going to be talking a lot about work styles, but I thought it was interesting. I pulled some stats recently, and this actually, for our regular listeners, we typically bring a lot of Gallup stats. This is going to be a different one. I'm bringing some information from Unily. They did a report recently, a digital noise impact report. And they found that 50% of all employees are distracted at least once every 30 minutes. And nearly a third of employees are distracted at least once every 15 minutes. So if you kind of do the math on all that, in an 8-hour day, we're talking about 160 plus interruptions or distractions every day. So this is why, as Jen alluded to, why we want to start spending some time about figuring out how can you minimize some of those distractions? Can you work around them? Where your talents come in? That's what I wanted to bring in terms of stats. Distractions are all around us. Now, how do we deal with it?
Well, and I love that stat, Chad, because I found in my past role in dealing with designing effective workplaces, we often cited a study from the UC Irvine back from 2008 that says that workers in the office are interrupted once every 11 minutes and takes up to 23 minutes to regain our focus. And that set the stage for so many things, creating this power of place, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as we go on, and then really understanding the best ways that we can work to manage those distractions. So I love that we're diving into this topic. So do you want to share with us, Bill, what has been your experience with managing distractions?
Well, as a person who has ADHD, I have dealt with distractions all my life. But managing distractions, in our day and age, it's one of the biggest keys to staying productive, especially in a world that's full of pings and notifications and reels and texts and X and Instagram and emails, all these sorts of things. And I did a little thinking about this. I'd love to look at the etymology of a word. And so distraction comes from a Latin root word, distrahere, which means to be drawn in different directions. So to be drawn or preventing someone from giving full attention to what is before them. And so if I'm distracted, as an individual, it implies that what once had my attention is no longer a priority for me, for my attention, and thus I'm drawn to something that is more meaningful, more purposeful, or more important. And so there's two ways to look at this. I'm going to talk about individuals. Ron's going to talk more about leaders. But if I'm thinking about my own distractions and how do I stay engaged, I seek to set up my workspace. I control the tech that is around me using do not disturb or turning my phone off. I limit the different sites that I can go to. I have an inbox discipline. If I turn off the notifications on my computer that says, "Oh, you have a new email," or "There's a text coming in," those sorts of things. And then I seek to train my attention. And that's not something that we stumble into or that we trip into. We have to do that by design to train our attention. In my workspace, I never have overhead lighting on because I can get too distracted too easily. I see a book and that takes my attention away from what I'm doing. And so I have to work at it. And it's a constant struggle to maintain my attention towards what is in front of me. Even mindful practices, taking a bit of a break in between jobs that are tasks that I'm doing every 5 minutes every hour or something like that. Making certain my workspace is clean. I have noise canceling headphones. I generally have music that is going for me because that helps me to maintain a peaceful sense of being and presence.
Mm.
It never has lyrics in it. And then I plan and prioritize. I have to-do lists and I block off various times. Okay, I'm gonna take 15 minutes and approach this. And oftentimes, I don't take the first task that's easiest. I might
Mm.
dive into one that's going to take a little more time. Frequently, at the end of a day, if I haven't completed everything that I have needed to get done, I prime the pump for the next morning to help me
Mm.
get my attention into the task that I have at hand. I might batch similar groups or similar tasks, like grouping emails or calls or errands. One of the things I do, when I have doctor's appointments, dental appointments, things like that, I try to schedule them all on the same day if I possibly can. And then we need to set boundaries and say, I'm
Yeah.
just not available right now, and figure out ways to communicate ability or availability. And then I think too about my strengths, and you called my strengths out for me, Jen. And so my strategic, I see the best path forward. That's what it does for me. But if I
Mhm.
overdo that, I can overthink my options. And so there's this constant tension, seeing, oh, is this the best way or is this the best way? Or ideation. I mean, I have a million ideas, these bursts of creativity and new ideas. The downside of that, the basement part of that, is I consistently or constantly am chasing ideas and chasing rabbits down a hole and not catching anything. Or activator. I love getting stuff started. I thrive on momentum. But that also means that I can jump too quickly between tasks because I want that adrenaline rush of getting something started, thriving on that momentum. Maximizer, striving for excellence. Um, but perfectionism on the opposite side of it. Keep on editing, keep on editing. Well, wait a minute. At some point, I've got to send that email. I got to quit editing it. And then futuristic, I can be inspired by the future. I see the potential that is out there, but I can also get lost in daydreaming instead of doing. And so those are just some of the things that over the years, as I know that I have attention deficit hyperactive disorder, are some things, coping mechanisms that I have put in place and seek to utilize my strengths. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm 100% with that. That's just what's in my mind, and I work at it. But it's a constant job.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I love you talking about the activator because you and I share that high activator, and I have the same issues.
I love everything you're sharing, Bill. I'm curious, given that I know that you have some themes that overlap, and we're going to get to talking about the themes, but
Yeah.
I wanted to bring Ron into the conversation about sort of what your sort of experience has been with managing distraction, and again, we'll get into the themes, but like we all have this exposure to multiple distractions. Jen and I laid out uh, the propensity of distractions to occur in our workday. I'm curious what your experience has been, Ron, and want to bring you into the conversation a little bit.
Sure, sure. But I enjoyed listening to Bill and
Yeah,
his comments
yeah,
as well. Um, Distractions, they're everywhere, right? So, but honestly, I think my experience with distractions has shifted over the years. I think I've learned to stop seeing them as interruptions and start to see them as signals as a leader.
hmm,
So they often point to something that's something deeper, maybe a misalignment of priorities or maybe unclear goals. So um, I really like the season where you're moving from just naming and claiming the strengths, but now moving to the aim part. And I think that's super important because that's where the action takes place. That's where the
Mhm.
value is added, is once you've moved towards the aiming. So I've realized being perhaps more intentional, how I approach work and how I use my time. Um, and I think I've also from a team perspective and leading teams, I've learned that delegation plays a huge part in me keeping focused. I've learned the hard way that you can't do it all by yourself. You need other people around you. So um, it's in delegating, it's freed up my space, it's freed up my time, but that's been my experience so far. I think it's important for people to, uh, you're talking about your recent episode about hybrid work. I think it's important to create spaces so that people can come and work on things. People can co-create the priorities together and allow them. And Bill, when we had a conversation before, was encouraging me to talk about our book, Co-Development Action Learning. And that's just one of many ways that you can bring people together so that they can co-create solutions together, accelerate objectives, and learn from each other. And that's one of the other kind of ways that I see that you're providing a space for people to collaborate. And providing a space for people to work separately in silo. Maybe they're working in a silo or working in a relay team or collaborating. So and creating those spaces for people.
nice,
Chad,
nice.
tell us about your personal experience.
Well, so when I first got thinking about this question, my a little bit more of the executing themes started to rear its head. I thought a little bit more on the practical side of
Mhm.
it's interesting. I got thinking about when I was used to work in an office. I worked in higher ed, and the number of distractions that can show up. Right, it's colleagues stopping by. It's the urgent requests. That you get through email. Bill has already talked about the email notifications. I was one of the things I always pride myself is I actually turned that function off immediately as soon as like there was an update to Outlook. You go in, change the don't give me the little pop up. but also just I was in two outward facing roles, first in admissions and then in alumni and development. So you also have to be responsive to the student that's calling in to know where their application stands, or a donor that wants to talk to you because they actually want to give you money, or get back in touch with you after you've seen them in a one-on-one visit. So the number of distractions weren't always of my own making. It wasn't just all the notifications or all the tech platforms that are now even more prevalent in our workplace. But then I also switched the lens a little bit and thought about, now as I work for myself out of my home, you have the FedEx deliveries. You've got the dog that needs attention. I've got two young boys that if they're home on, say, school break, like next week, I've got distraction multipliers just walking around me. And that's, I love them, all the pieces. They do provide a level of distraction at some point. And so it's, how do you start thinking about, creating the structure? And this is something we're going to get into probably in a second around our themes, but just be aware of how many things come into our lives that can be distracting. I love Will's breakdown of the word, the taking your eye off the priority, or a new priority. And this goes to Ron was saying too, about how do you so develop what those priorities are and where should people have their attention. But just, I think, being aware of, and as our listeners listen to this, thinking about the number of places distractions can come from is something to at least think about and then process. And then, we're going to start talking about some strategies here in a second, or how our themes come into this, talent themes come into this. But thinking about how you address each of those numerous distraction sources through your themes is going to be really impactful. And I'm hoping that that's where we get to in the rest of the episode. But when I start thinking about, my experience with distractions, it's how many can you count? What are the sources of them, and then how you address it. So, is there anything you want to add to this question?
I just wanted to go back to that when then we called it. So because I was with a Steelcase dealer, so that Steelcase is a office furniture manufacturer. In case you don't know, it's one of the big three: Herman Miller, Hayworth, and Steelcase. I think Knoll and others are trying to get themselves in there in the top three, but Steelcase called it the power of place. And what I really love, so space is really important to me, coming from architectural background and then working within office furniture spaces for a lot of years. I've realized that this is really pivotal to me. And I think why this specific topic fits within like our personal space as well as like office spaces is that we have to make those places around us that are conducive to us getting our work done. So where Bill was talking about that, not having the overhead lights on so that he doesn't see a book and get distracted, those types of things, like having places to go that are specifically meant for whatever task it is you're working on, I think is really, really important. Chad, you having your own office in your home helps keep those walking distractions from coming in, but not always. But it's setting up that, the expectation of, when dad's working, unless, someone's bleeding, maybe we're not interrupting, unless there's something serious going on. Unfortunately, dogs aren't ever doing what they're supposed to with that. But what I loved about that part of my furniture journey in my career was that this open office, this issue with distractions created all kinds of fun things. And like now we see them like the phone booths or privacy booths, enclaves, high back seating, that has like acoustic stuff in it, sound masking even. So, the white noise that comes over the speakers that helps deaden the voices across offices. And it's all so important because it helps you as a user of the space be able to get into a place where you can work best. And that might not be at your desk. And that's one of those things that I love about this conversation, is because it does give us, it reminds us we need to be our own advocates to look for those spaces that work best for us.
Yeah, I would agree. Bill and I are E2 Grow coaches, and one of the habits, there's 5 habits that for high performing teams. And I use this in my from emerging leaders to executive leaders, and it's providing that space for yourself during the week So
Yes.
at the beginning of the week, you have a weekly aim. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, the weekly aim, even with senior execs, I ask them the question, what are your top three priorities? What are the barriers for you to achieving those? And what strengths are you going to be using, or who can help you?
Yeah.
And then at the end of the week, there's the reflection. And the reflection is what worked well, even better if.
Yeah.
Because, as in the famous words of John Dewey, American educator, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And
Mm.
so it goes back to the physical spaces that you're talking about, but also those mental spaces
Yes.
that we need to set for ourselves. And everybody's different. Maybe, you set this self-reflective feedback in there because today, the rate of change is greater than the rate of learning. So we need to do different things differently. And maybe it is
Right.
different spaces physically, but also different ways of doing work and collaborating together.
Yeah. Love that.
So building on that, this is actually something, what you're talking about, Ron, is something that I want to actually highlight a little later in the episode when we think about how the managers can think about people's themes and spaces and so forth. But before we get there, I'm curious, both of you have started to touch on this, is as we think about the routines we set up for ourselves, the spaces we need, we know that a lot of that is informed by our natural talents. And given that all four of us are Gallup certified strengths coaches, I am curious, for our listeners' sake, how have your talents been helpful in managing your distractions so that you can be more productive? And Ron, I want to come. Actually, first, Bill, I'll come to you, and then Ron, I'd love for you to expand on some of the answers you've already touched on.
Sure.
But I'm just curious, like, are there particular themes or talent themes, Bill, that have been particularly important for you, or ones that you've developed to help you with managing distraction?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about practical spaces and flow of work and all of those sorts of things. And I have, you can't see it here, but I have a little cubby hole down in my basement. It's 5 feet wide and 12 feet long. Okay. And so when I finished my basement, I had this space in mind. It's 5 feet wide because that's how wide my desk is. It's 12 feet wide the other way because that's how wide this half of the basement is. So you go around a corner and here's my space. So I was strategic in thinking ahead, futuristic about what that's going to feel like. What kind of
Mm.
spaces do I like? I like enclosed spaces that feel private. Now, for today, getting ready for this strategically, my dogs are in the backyard. Otherwise they'd be sitting at my feet begging. You know, I have, how do I get them in the backyard? Here's a treat. Let's go to the backyard. That's an idea. I take action, getting them out there. Maximize this potential. I wanted to maximize my availability so that I'm not distracted, turning my attention someplace else.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because when we turn our attention to something, it gives us purpose and meaning. And so that's what I seek to create the arena in which I can be most attentive and know myself well enough to know that I get distracted. And when we know ourselves and we know that we get distracted, I don't see that as a dishonor, or a failing of any sort. It's who I am as part of me. And so how do I work best with that? To be attentive to others, to be attentive to the situation, to create, to strategize, to plan, to activate, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I, I build on what Bill was saying, customization for focus,
Mm.
using his strengths as a prioritization, um, also structuring himself, for success. So creating focus rhythms. Those are extremely important points that he's this bringing. I also think that it's interesting that yes, it's important to know the themes. Yes, it's important to name and claim, but it's equally more important to aim them. It's equally more important just to move past naming those. So I think that it's so evident in the way Bill has used. Yes, Clifton's strengths is a tool, and your strengths are the key, and then putting them in action is the lock. And that's so I think that's extremely important to get yourself to propel yourself to go past naming and claiming your strengths
Oh
and
yeah.
really aiming those. For me, I have, you mentioned that I use my not necessarily top five. I use my best five. So
Right.
what I thought was interesting for me was when I thought about it at first and wrote notes for myself to prepare for this conversation, strategic came up. It really came into play because I'm
Mm.
good at mapping out things, and it helps me to focus on the most important things for me, and especially when distractions pop up. I also thought about relator. So strategic is number two, and relator is number 10.
Okay.
And Relator helps me connect with others and understand where they're coming from. So when the distraction comes in, as again I mentioned earlier, I see it as a signal rather than as a distraction. So okay, there's something there because as a team leader of teams, sometimes you're getting people come to you, and that becomes a distraction. But if you look at it as a signal, okay, what haven't I been clear about? Maybe they're not worried, they're not aware of the priorities, and so how else can I perhaps reorganize my check-in for the team at the beginning of the week? So and I also share futuristic. So for me, futuristic is huge. I don't know. I'm sure it's the same with Bill in terms of getting set for ourselves and seeing ourselves in the future. And then I'll go back. It's not a strength, but it's putting strengths in action, and that's intentionality. For me, intentionality has been extremely important, really key, and it means that if I it allows me to delegate certain things, and then allows me to focus and clear my space. And what I found interesting is that I wrote my notes, but I actually have discipline in number 5. And so for me, that was the observation was I do it so naturally I don't even notice it.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my partner, who's a fellow Gallup coach as well, and she said, "Yeah, you haven't mentioned discipline." I said, I just take that for granted. But that being said, obviously I use discipline to help me organize my things as well. So there
Yeah.
you go.
And that's always been one of my ones. I crush on you all the time about that, having discipline low for me with all these other executing strengths. It's so difficult. And then I think, just the inability to stay focused. Like I was waiting for you to say discipline. I'm like, why is he not talking about discipline? But you're right. It's so, ingrained in you. It's who you are. It's how you do what you do. And I just wanted to, applaud you for your discipline, because I'm all the time wishing I had it.
Yeah. Well,
I'd love to speak to Ron's discipline if I could.
Yeah.
The co-development action learning process that he has participated in the development of, I've seen him use it. I've observed his discipline because it's a step-by-step process that takes us from point A to a place where action can be implemented and understanding what we've learned. And he was very disciplined in keeping us on point, keeping us focused at those things. And so strategic, that was all laid out, was steps 1 through 7, but then the discipline as the facilitator to keep it moving forward. And so it's a marvelous process, for teams to use if you're worried about your teams getting distracted and getting off task or off point. This co-development action learning process is a marvelous tool to be able to use along with, and understanding your strengths with it. I think
yeah.
that's a fair statement, Ron.
Yeah, absolutely. It provides a space for people to co-create. Provides a space for people to accelerate their priorities and their objectives. And it's one of the different approaches with collective intelligence, and it provides a space for people to learn from each other. And I think that perhaps in today's world, in today's context, sometimes we need that. Everybody needs everybody. It's kind of like Bill referring to his cubby hole in his basement. This is a cubby hole for a team to participate, or a community of practice, or in leadership training programs. Those are the three areas where we see it. And Bill, you've seen it work as a professor at the university, and in your program with your entrepreneurs, the faith-based entrepreneurs. You've seen it work. So yeah, it's being intentional. It's not leaving innovation, teamwork, and learning to serendipity.
Chance, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And intentionality is such a great word. Okay, I love the etymology. It comes from Latin root word tendere, which means to move toward. And so with intention, I move towards something and it gives me purpose and meaning. And so, if we're distracted, we're drawn another way. So to keep our intentionality moving in a direction, it fills us with purpose and meaning. We're in our wheelhouse. We're in our sweet spots.
Yeah.
As the three of you have been speaking, and Jenna, I've loved your contributions in addition to our wonderful guests. What has struck me, and I have, you see on the recording, organized that Ron and Bill are sort of on the top of my screen, and Jenna and I are on the bottom. And Ron and Bill, what I heard in your answers was so much more like the strategic thinking domain themes. You talked about futuristic. You talked about there was one that really popped up, but the strategic, futuristic, and creating some intentionality and focus, to sort of minimize the distractions. Whereas Ben and I, have constant conversations around, we're a little bit more on the action side. Both of us have high responsibility. I have discipline at number 6. That's not another jab at Jen. I know that she gives me a hard time about she wants it from me. But much more the executing side. And so it's an interesting dynamic that I wanted to point out for particularly our listeners, that this intentionality, this ability to focus can come from different places, that the different themes come into play in how you set up spaces, in how you develop that intentionality, in how you develop your priorities. I've that high responsibility for me, a lot of my intentionality and where I put my focus, and what I put as a priority is, how do I respond to the things I've promised to people, versus maybe a little bit more of the futuristic that I think, Bill, you were highlighting about, thinking about sort of the forward, and Ron, you touched on the strategic, thinking about a couple different pathways to get there. So anyway, it was an interesting sort of thread that I saw, just given how you're organized on my screen. I was like, oh, the strategic, thinkers are at the top of my screen, and Jen and I are very, very executing sided, in terms of how we think about this, minimizing distraction. So just something to think about. And I'm sure if we had people on here about relationship building or those with influencing, they would have their own take. And so for those listeners that have, themes in those domains, I encourage you to think about this conversation in that light. In what domain are you utilizing to create those priorities, those intentionality, etc. So,
and
my quick little takeaway from our sort of your 3-way conversation, I was being a little bystander for a second, but that was what I was picking out. So,
well, and I love that you brought that out about the intentionality of using your responsibility to keep your promises. And the words I was using wasn't intentionality, but that I'm grounded by my promises. So with activator high, it means that I love to jump from thing to thing. So I could start, but then my achiever wants to finish it. So I don't want to jump to something else until I've finished that. So with achiever, it helps me keep grounded in the task I'm in. So that's part of where I, with that intentionality for me comes from this like a grounding place. I'm grounding myself in the promises I made to others, and then the like grounded in the tasks that I'm already, have set as my priorities. What I kind of loved about the conversation about this, relationship building, is that my adaptability at 6 7, sorry. 6 is consistency. My adaptability at 7 means that I'm typically jumping from person to person, whoever like is meaning the most, right? And I talked to Chad about this before, explaining like how my priorities get set when I have so many different things happening all at once. But that's one of those things I do think that helps. It's then I'm like grounding it in the person that's asking it. So if I've made a promise, that really does, like Chad said, with his responsibility, mine does too. It really keeps me grounded to those promises I made and helps me avoid a lot of those distractions if I can keep all my things from buzzing and beeping and all of those other things that we talked about.
Yeah.
Chad,
I would add,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add that also intentionality is intentionally using your strengths. So the tool is self-awareness, and then you're moving from self-awareness to leading with intention. And for me, leadership is about having a positive impact on people and situations. And so it's a matter of leading with intention. It's a matter of turning up or dialing down certain strengths. And what I think that some people fall into the trap of, they think they know themselves and they say, okay, this is who I am, so this is who I'm going to show up. And where what we're talking about intentionality is, this is the people that are in the room or in on the Zoom call, and this is the context. So this is how I'm going to use my strengths positively. I may hold back certain strengths and put forward certain strengths. And so that's, for me, that's the important nuance about intentionality, is to use your strengths with intention. So use your strengths to make a situation or a context better, as opposed to what I see often is some people say, well, here I'm self-aware. I know my strengths really, really well, and that's who I am, and I'm on autopilot.
Yeah.
And we know we're on autopilot 70% of the time. It's that 30%, and it works for us most of the time. But it's in that 30% that we shouldn't be on autopilot, and we should intentionally raise our strengths or lower our strengths in terms of intensity.
Oh,
I just
Ron,
wanted to
thank
add
you.
that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that goes into, kind of feeds right into our next question, which is really wanting to talk about like people who struggle to be seen and heard in this space, when we're talking about trying to manage our productivity and those distractions, like you said, like seeing those as I'm sorry, you didn't call them triggers. You called them something else. What was the word? Signals. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Like signals that there may be something that we need to focus more attention on, and then realizing, where that balance should be between like, this is who I am and this is how I act, as opposed to intentionally focusing some of those efforts. Bill, I'd love to come to you for your thoughts on this. Like what are some tips you could share for people who are struggling to be seen and heard and productive?
Well, first of all, I think the leader bears a lot of responsibility here to be a student of the members of her or his team, and to help them to focus on their strengths and to draw it out of them, and to develop them. I mean, it's not something, I love the way Ron put it, intentionality, lead by design, lead by intention.
Yes.
It's not something we stumble into or trip into. It has to be intentional. And so for those persons, as a leader, if I'm part of a team, and there's a person who's reticent to get involved or open up or to create a safe space, they need to trust me. What are the 4 needs of the followers?
Yes.
It's my responsibility. It's incumbent upon me to create a safe space where they do feel like their opinion is honored and understood, and that there aren't any silly questions or questions that aren't important, to bring them to the table. And again, I got to go back and give a shout out to Ron and the co-development action learning. The way I've seen it work, it's even those who are reticent to speak are willing to jump in and go, Oh, yeah, I've been asked this specific question, and I can respond to that. I have an idea, I have an opinion about that.
Great. Yeah, I love that. And I think it speaks a lot to where you were talking about at the beginning, like having some of that mindfulness, creating those
Mhm.
techniques that will help you create some of that calm, whether that's, and your manager creating that safe
Mhm.
psychological space for you, or
Mhm.
you having to create it for yourself to the place where
And
you can feel like you can speak out.
sure, and those folks who are reticent to speak out, self-leadership, know yourself well, and create an internal narrative that is encouraging and provides confidence and a willingness to step out there. And if you stumble and fall, okay, it's an opportunity to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Chad or Ron? Ron, do you have anything you'd like to add to this piece?
I think that for me, I hate to repeat myself, but it's my discipline comes through in so many ways. Is that I set my priorities, my discipline with but I also think that even if I go back and I look at some of the other things, some of the other strengths, like I have a ranger and self assurance, and so I structure myself for success.
Yeah.
So it's a matter, and it's speaking to what Bill was saying about self leadership. If you take the responsibility for your own career growth, take responsibility for who you are, and 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 expressing your identity or the internal narrative that Bill was referring to, and expressing what you need and what you bring. And we as we move from naming and claiming and aiming, we're talking about each of those strengths from the what do I bring and what do I need, and it's that the second part, the need part, that
Yes.
often gets pushed back down,
Yeah.
but it's developing that and being you know, as Bill said, nothing's perfect, and you're going to you're going to fail. You're not going to be a failure, but you're going to fail, and that's part of learning to
Sure.
to 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 align yourself with the roles. I think from a leader's perspective, and maybe that's something another question later on, but from a leader's perspective, as a Gallup coach, we spend a lot of time in the coaching conversations. So the conversation of know me, align me, recognize me, and having those structure. I use the word
Yep.
structure of coaching conversations throughout the year, and it's not a one-time event. And so it's
Yeah.
that continual, and it speaks to what Bill was talking about developing your team and developing your leaders. So for me, those are the kind of the ideas that when you ask the question about being seen and heard, it's being able to express who you are. Maybe it's your leadership signature, maybe it's your unique contribution, maybe it's your personal brand, whatever term you want to use on it. Use your Clifton Strengths report and all your strengths to create that inner narrative. And that I would even push it to an identity
Sure.
and the different roles that you play as an identity so that you're able to express it, you're able to talk to people about it. And then it's more of when you go to collaborate with someone, it's not a hit and miss. It's okay, now you're getting to know each other, which leads us from name, claim, aim to partnerships and
Yeah.
collaboration.
Mm,
And that's, kind of really that's the ultimate goal here, right?
right.
We're taking a self-awareness tool and we're bringing it to, and that's the why. The why is collaboration, leading with intention, building strategic partnerships in a complex world. That's the why.
Yeah.
Ron,
Resulting in productivity.
yeah,
Yes,
right,
right.
Absolutely.
right. which is sort of the not tail end of the title of this episode,
Yeah.
but managing distraction for productivity. So I love
Right.
that you brought that right back, Bill. Ron, one of the things that you said really struck me in terms of the identity piece. Jen and I have had conversations about a lot about the people that she's hoping to coach and work with. Often people that are sort of the odd person out, the the male professional in what is considered or has traditionally been maybe a female dominated industry, vice versa, the female in a more male dominated or historically dominated field. Jen, I know you come from that architecture, construction and architecture and all that has traditionally had a little bit more of a male masculine history to it. Um,
Yes.
what I found interesting about what you said, Ron, is that often is the initial identity that that person gets kind of tagged with, like, oh, they're not the misfit, but they're just the odd person out. They're the anomaly.
Hmm.
Um, not, I don't want that to sound too strong, but you kind of get the point. And what I found really interesting is when we think about getting those people to open up or to think about how they address distractions is that if you have done all this work to know what the majority is experiencing in terms of distractions, but you don't take a second to identify the identity and the distractions of the minority,
Yeah.
you uh, lose a conversation there. And then conversely, I think if you can help that person figure out what their unique identity is within the team, even though they are the odd person or odd few out, that they still have a role. That if we can reframe their, understand what their closest strengths or their innate talents bring to the team, you develop that identity. You improve the psychological safety that Jen was talking about. Um, but also you get this whole other lens on, okay, what are the unique distractions that they're dealing with, or how do they need to uniquely address the distractions that they experience? I found that whole sort of, it's all tied together. It's one big Venn diagram in my head.
Hmm.
But thinking about that in terms of identity and distraction and our talents, I thought was just really, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that that's something that, as we're about to talk about in terms of how leaders and managers can do better, I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So I appreciated the bringing the identity piece into this. All right, so given that Ron led us in a wonderful direction about talking about leaders and people managers, however you want to speak about them, Ron, I am actually going to start with you. I want you to sort of pick up the ball right where you had it in terms of thinking about the advice you would offer, particularly brand new managers. Those are a lot of the people I try and coach. I'm always looking for new ideas. You two, both you and Bill, have been around plenty of leaders in your history. Just what sort of advice would you offer new leaders or new managers about using their strengths for managing those distractions? We've all talked a little bit about ours, how we've done it, but think about the next person. What advice would you offer or approaches?
Well, I think that new managers, they want to achieve a lot of things rapidly, and if I was to give some advice to a new manager, is that other than lead with attention,
Yeah.
don't get caught up in the rush of getting things done. Instead, take time to really think about what is most important, and how can you make the most impact with the energy that you have. So for me, a new manager, just the check-ins with their team. So what are the priorities of people for the week, and then checkups during the week, and then checkouts at the end of the week. So
Mm.
those and to set yourself those routines that you set yourself up, so you are uh, hearing the signals, trying to discern what is noise and what is real information for you to do that. But and then you clearly communicate up as well that here are your intentions and your priorities, And then I would say that, once you've created that vision for yourself and your team, and the priorities, then I would move to, as a new manager, starting to talk about how we're going to work together, working principles or a charter, things like that. And then, I have a bias as a co-author of a book. I would start to say, introduce your team to collaborative practices and collective intelligence. So, and why I say that is that, and it really depends on what context you're in. But I would also say that you want to set yourself up for success, but you also want to prioritize with and prioritize and have a purpose. And it goes back to what Bill was saying, is to provide purpose and meaning for your team. I think that's really important. But also set yourself aside times where you're going to do the deep work. You're going to, and structure it so that, if you're working in a hybrid world, well, there's a reason why you're coming into the office, or there's a reason why you're going to do the deep work. And often we get stuck in routines that have nothing to do with us, right? Strategic planning traditionally is September to December, and then we implement from January to December, right?
Right.
But everybody knows that there's a new initiative that comes down, or a regulatory change that comes down in the first quarter, and then we've got to realign. Well, you set yourself up for success by taking the time, and I guess the biggest takeaway is that you're learning. And so set yourself up to learn. You are always going to be learning. So make sure that you learn from those experiences. So at some point in time, carve out, whether it's half an hour or 45 minutes, to say, okay, what went well? And what could I improve? And what did I learn? And how can I improve? And maybe that's my maximizer, which I don't know the order as well as Jen. I think my maximizer is number 6, but maybe that's my maximizer speaking. But I would say that for new managers, you're still learning. So set yourself up for success to learn.
Yeah. As somebody that has learner as their number one theme, I resonate with that. I'm going to expand that just a touch, just so that some of our listeners don't immediately freak out and think, oh, I have to have learner as a number one to be a new manager. I would expand your thought and just offer, like, what theme could you use to initiate or engage with new learning? So, Ron, you mentioned maximizer, learning how to do something just a little bit better. I learned, and so that's really where I go. Jen, I know that you probably, just knowing
Learn
what I
by
know about your,
doing.
right, your activator, and probably a little bit of achiever blend, that you probably learn a lot by doing. Bill, I've heard you talk about strategic and futuristic, and I don't want to put it in words in anybody's mouth, but boy, those are learning, opportunities about thinking about the multiple paths and so forth. So I love what you said, Ron. I just want to make sure we expand it, to make sure that the rest of our listeners who don't have some of the themes you and I have, can think about that learning perspective maybe a little bit broader.
Yeah, I would say the one word that ties it together is curiosity.
There you
Be
go.
curious.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yep. Awesome. Bill, I'm sure I saw your face, like you kept nodding along, and I could definitely tell you had something to add. What sort of advice would you have in terms of helping new managers, using their strengths? Again, this is strengths applied, using their strengths to manage distraction, so that they can be more productive.
Well, and I'm still kind of tuned into this new manager, and what kind of advice would I say? Of course, I ditto everything that Ron would say.
Yeah.
Stepping into a new role can be overwhelming, and so they have so many different options, the directions that they can go, and I would encourage them, if they know their strengths and they want to lean into them. The first thing that they need to do is to differentiate between the tyranny of the shoulds and the reality of expectations. The shoulds oh, I should be this, I should do that, I should do this, and the tyranny of that, and how the internal narrative can just spiral us down. But what's the reality of the expectations? What's really expected of me here, and how can I utilize my strengths to be able to fulfill those expectations? Not something that is beyond the tyranny, the tyranny of the shoulds, which
Right.
is we all have them. Oh, I should have done that. I could have done that better. What if I'd have approached it this way? And we'll second guess ourselves. So understand your strengths, walk in the truth of who you are, and be teachable. Be willing to be wrong and to learn from the people around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What I mean, for me, that really spoke to me. For me, uh, for managing managing my distractions, the three words that come to mind are humility, because humility that I can improve, courage to try things differently, and then discipline, because I'm
Mm.
using my strength, and that's what motivates me. But yeah, absolutely humility and willing to try things with courage. Yeah.
Jen,
And
any thoughts?
I love that we've hit on this kind of all this thread all the way across the entire show. But it was in that like advocating for your needs, and I think the new managers need to do that too. If they were promoted and they came from that doer role and now they're in that managing role, it might be really easy for them to backslide into taking on some of the responsibilities of the people who they're managing, and like understanding where your talents lie, and if you are heavily executing and you can easily backslide into that. I'm talking to them because that's my high strengths as well. But you just have to make sure that you are setting those times and spaces where you have heads down time to do the things that are important to you, but then being able to delegate those other things, and in that delegation, empowering and encouraging others not to just come to you when they have a problem, but to come to you with a problem and a solution. What do they think could help this? What do they see that could be differently? Because we are new at this. Like, let's lean into those around us who are doing the work and make sure that we're supporting them, but then also advocating for our needs and what we need in order for us to be the most productive in our work as well.
Yeah, that's an important mind shift from
It is.
going from uh, it's only me that can do it perfectly, so I
Absolutely.
have to do stuff, to the mind shift is that if I'm going to get everything done, I can't do it myself. And that's for a new manager, a huge mind shift.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting. Most of the points I was going to touch on, you've already talked about, so I'm not going to repeat those. The one thing I want to take though is, Ron, talking about sort of that expanding your mindset, from the individual to leading others, is I also think there needs to be an expansion of talking about we talked very early on in terms of the space or the environment. And the only part I was going to expand is that the new manager needs to understand that about each of their team members.
Mhm.
So, Jen and I did an episode recently on, hybrid work. We've done ones on setting boundaries. And I think that if we're talking about trying to manage distractions or where our intention gets shifted, I love that reframe, Ron.
Mm-hmm.
Distractions often get seen as sort of a negative, and I love the reframe on it. Just gives us a signal on a different intention. Um, what understanding what each of your team members needs based, there's that word again, needs, based on their themes. So maybe you've got somebody with focus. We've had Amy Schumann on the show, and she thrives if you can just let her go and be at home and take on a major project for 3 days. You will get the most out of her. Whereas somebody with woo or relator is probably going to need the in office and maybe a little bit more, what we've sort of deemed distraction of people stopping by. That actually feeds them.
Mm-hmm.
So just as a new manager, learn about your team, but what they need in terms of their environment, their space, the way they set up their office, and be respectful of that. It might be an office, it might be somewhere else within the facility, or again, I was on college campuses, so maybe it's someplace else on campus, maybe it's at home, but maybe home is too distracting because the FedEx guy's showing up, the dog's barking, the kids are in your face. But if you allow them to go to the library and find a quiet corner, and they do their really great work because they're being left alone by their colleagues, but they're still in proximity, boy, what a beautiful balance. So just that curiosity about sort of what your team needs and setting up their environment so that they can be less distracted, or have that intention pulled in a number of different directions all at the same time too often. I think it's something really good. And then I also would shift that over to making sure that the team members understand their impact on others with potential distractions. So like, bring it back to when we're later, probably more likely to stop by people's offices and want to, chat it up. But if you've got somebody with discipline or focus, or, they want to do the deep work, intellection, making sure that the team members know each other well enough and sharing that knowledge so that you can kind of manage the people with will or relator, or, the ones that want to have the interactions versus, and it's not so much a versus thing, it's just how those interactions go. Make sure that you've set it up in a way that works for both groups. So anyway, I loved that you started with sort of the tight circle of knowing yourself. Ron, I think you did a really nice job of centering that. I would just expand that next circle of like, how do you learn about your team and making sure that you're setting up them for the right types of distractions, the right types of re-intentioning that we've touched on this whole episode. So anyway, that's my little contribution. I'm curious, I know we've touched on some serious highlights: and intention, reframing distraction, environment. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to, this is purely for our guest, that you would like to re-highlight here at the end of our episode, that maybe a quick summary or an insight that you've come away with in having this conversation? Ron, I'll come to you first.
I think that leading with intention is for me, and the fact that knowing yourself is very, very important. But there's a greater why down the road for that. And Clifton's strengths and themes are not labels. They're just ways for us to express our talents and our needs. But the greater why is so that we can build better partnerships, strategic partnerships, because we can't do it alone, and we need to collaborate. And so for me, that's one of the points. The other one of the points, obviously, is that as a leader of teams, to provide your team with spaces, times where you can collaborate and work together. Yeah. So those would be the 2 points that I would bring.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Bill, your last thoughts?
Yeah. Clifton Strengths is a great tool to pull back the curtain and peel away the layers and help us to understand ourselves. But I believe that one of the most important things that every individual can do, and Clifton Strengths may be of assistance to it, is to answer their own why. Why am I here? What is my potential, my capacity, my purpose here on this blue spot in this universe? And to wake up every day knowing that is in front of you. And it doesn't have to be a long, lengthy thing, but just something that's very, very short. This is my why. This is what I do on a daily basis. Whatever I do, it is fulfilling that vision that I have, my personal vision that I have for myself. So I encourage my students and people that I coach to develop their own personal vision statement, based upon what they understand about themselves, with their strengths or the tools that they might be using for that self-awareness, and to be able to fulfill that, find meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I so much agree, Bill. Focusing on your why helps you get past the but.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. For our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, And as you consider the thoughts that Ron and Bill have shared with us, I'm going to keep encouraging to keep playing to your strengths.
And as always, be uniquely you.
If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts.